All right. I don't know about you, but I have looked in many a brochure in the course of my life, looking and dreaming about a place to take a vacation. You know, some of you might be mountain people. Some of you might be desert people like Tammy and them out from Arizona. Got some friends and family out there. Or you might be a basin person. You know, everybody's got their own ideas about places you'd like to go. But when I dream about going to the islands, this is what I expect. I expect a bungalow on the water. I expect the nice mountains in the background, crystal clear water. And chances are you've gone someplace where you've had expectations too, based on the booklet, based on the things you see on the internet. And then you get there and it looks like this. It's your bungalow on the beach, and you're like, what in the world, right? And it's just the way it goes sometimes. Expectations and what reality is don't always match up. And last week we said expectation by definition is a strong belief that something will happen or be the case in the future. That is the dictionary definition of expectations. And the reality is, like we said last week, everybody in here has an expectation, right? And so my expectation right now is for Carl to come on up and preach. That was not his expectation, as you can see, right? So anyway, when you go to the restaurant, some of you order a well-done steak. I mean, char-grilled like my wife, Jennifer. I mean, it's got to look like shoe leather before she eats it. But when it comes out like this, if you're a well-done steak eater, raise your hand. Got a few out there. When it comes out like this, do you eat it? No, a couple of you. No, I mean, if you've ordered a well-done and it comes out like this, how many of you are going to send it back? A couple of you will. It didn't meet your expectation. You're expecting something to look like leather, and it comes out mooing, you know, and you're like, no, 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 no. My dad, on the other hand, would say this is overdone already. He basically eats his steak raw, which is just nasty on so many levels. But I want to deal with several quotes on expectations this morning, all right? Some of them are known. Some of them I don't know who the authors are on some of them. So just go with me for a few minutes. Expectations are resentments under construction. We all have expectations, and when they're not met, we can begin to resent that our expectations aren't being met. I mean, I'm paying for this steak. It better come out the way I ordered it, right? We can have some unmet expectations and resentment under construction. By learning to not expect people to know what I want and need, I've learned to be much clearer in my communication. You know, Don said that's kind of got a good thing here. What's the idea here is some people aren't going to understand what it is I expect, so I need to be clearer in what I do. Think about that with the people you work with. Think about that with your family members, your children. Think about that really with anybody. The clearer you are in communication, the more likely the expectations you have are going to be met, if at all possible. Your expectations are your ideas about how good or bad something is supposed to be. You may go someplace, man, that was awful. And somebody else said, man, that was the best thing I ever had. You may go to a beach, and it wasn't exactly what you were looking for. You were looking for the Caribbean, but you got Sippermore Point. If you just like being on the water, your expectations are fine, right? It's an opportunity about your ideas about how good or bad something is supposed to be. Unspoken expectations are almost always guaranteed to go unfulfilled. If you don't know what I expect from you, how are you going to meet it? If I don't know what's expected, how, right? And so many times, a lot of our expectations, quite frankly, aren't met because people don't know. Any relationship, including marriage, is built on two imperfect people trying to work on issues together. Now, I know there's not any imperfect people in here. But think about that for a minute. We live in a fallen world. We live in a world that from the time of the garden up till now, sin has entered into it. Things have not gone the way God wanted them to go. And on my best day, I'm imperfect. On Jennifer's best day, she's imperfect. And when you have two people who are imperfect trying to work together, there's going to be days when things don't go right. There's going to be days when you don't meet expectations. There are going to be days when you don't communicate well. There's going to be days where you say and do things and you're like, well, that just didn't go right. And the more we understand that, the better off we're going to be. Because then we can start looking about how to interact and address situations. Now, when you think about it, if you expect perfection and don't work on your unrealistic expectations, you're going to lose your joy. Now, I don't know if you think your expectations are unrealistic or not. I think it's realistic to think for you to show respect, for you to receive respect, right? But it's unrealistic to think that somebody's always going to do the exact right thing every time without making mistakes. That's just unrealistic. You're not going to be able to always have what you want to come out of your mouth come out of your mouth. You're not always going to have somebody act in a way that you think they should. It's going to make mistakes. Relationship expectations are individual. There's 400 people, you've got 400 different expectations. If you have 3 children, you've got 3 different expectations. If you have one friend, there's at least 2 expectations going on. Relationships expectations are individual. They're biased based on where you come from. If you grew up in a house where the mom always had a hot breakfast on the table, and you get married or you go on you out with somebody and you wake up and there's not a hot breakfast on the table and you're sitting there thinking there should be a hot breakfast on the table. Well, I didn't grow up that way. There's your coffee. Have a good day. Right? It's biased based on where we come from and how we're raised. It can differ from person to person, from culture to culture, from gender to gender, quite frankly. Any relationship, including marriage, is built on 2 imperfect people trying to work on issues together. As we said earlier, 2 imperfect people trying to work on them together. Who's going to clean it? Right? Jamie says she will. Great. I'll see you this afternoon. But isn't that how it is in life? There's stuff that comes up, and I don't want to do it. I expect you to do it. No. That's your job. And there are just some things that we don't want to do. So in James chapter 4 is where we're going to be. It's a passage that's familiar to a lot of us. I'm going to address it on a more personal level, I think. You see, I asked our community group last week, what do we expect from each other on an individual basis? And I would ask you now, what do you expect of the men and women that are part of this God family here in New Iberia? What are your expectations? What are your expectations of the people who live in your household? What are your expectations of those that you have an intimate relationship with? As we move forward, in James chapter 4, verses 1 through 2. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and you fight. You do not have because you do not ask God, and when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Now, he's talking to the church here as a whole, right? That's who James is writing to. But I want us to bring it down on an individual level. What causes fights and quarrels between a man and a woman? What causes fights and the quarrels between you and your best friend? What causes fights and quarrels between your spouse, your coworkers? They come from your desires that battle within. Now, we have selfish motives. He's going to go on to say thinking like the world and being friends with the world and trying to look at the world, do things in the worldly way versus God's way. But the battle within you, we have these desires going on. Oftentimes, that's the spirit and the flesh going at war. But what about unspoken desires? How many fights have I been in with my spouse over the last 31 years because I had expectations that I never made clear? I just assumed she would know. How many arguments have I had with friends over the years because they assumed that I knew what they wanted or what they needed? Oftentimes, we have these expectations of those around us, but we don't speak them. We just assume that they know them or should know them. And that can lead to a fight. Oftentimes, we don't know how to have our own voice and to say what's on our heart or what our expectations are. So maybe that's what's holding it in. Maybe we don't share what we really desire because I don't know how to. I'm not confident. Or every time I shared it in the past, I got beat down, so I just keep it to myself. Well, now I'm in a relationship with somebody else, and it creates issues. Y'all ever experienced any of that, or am I the only one? Okay, I'm just making sure. You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. How many relationships, friendships, family, co-workers have been destroyed because of unmet expectations? Expectations that were never spoken until after the death came, figuratively. You do not have because you do not ask God. Well, you covet, but you cannot get what you want. You quarrel and fight. That's selfishness. I want what I want. I covet what I want, and we're going to fight about it because I can't get it. But I can't get it because you don't know to give it to me. But you should know to give it to me, right? That's how we live in our culture. Not everybody, but most of us kind of have that struggle from time to time. And when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives. And we're not talking about, hey, Jennifer, I need a cup of coffee. There are some things that I need or you need in a relationship that are really important for the vulnerability and the depth of the relationship to grow. And some of those are going to need God's help to happen. We're going to have to spend time learning and serving one another. I don't think anybody in here truly would sit back and say, I am joyful being in a one-sided, selfish relationship. But that's what happens when we have wrong motives. You know, we say, oh, you're my BFF until you don't meet my expectations. So what causes fights and quarrels among you? See, we could talk about it at the congregational level, and that's who James is talking about. But what about on the individual basis? With those you share space with on a weekly basis throughout the week? What's causing the fights and quarrels among you? What are the unspoken desires? What are the unspoken expectations that aren't being met that lead to quarreling and fighting? Quarreling, the definition of quarreling is a heated argument or disagreement. And this is the part I find to be true. Typically about trivial issues and between people who are usually on good terms. Think about how many fights we've had or arguments you've had about something that really doesn't matter. But yet, boom, it's like a nuclear bomb goes off. Now, I can tell you on my behavior at times, it's because unspoken expectations that I have that aren't being met, and then I begin to start seeing the negative in things and not the positive, as if the person that's not meeting my expectations is always doing it on purpose, and that they just must not really care about me. That's the devil talking in my mind, feeding me that line of bull. Maybe it's the experience I've had. I haven't been loved on and cared for, where I matter. So what's trivial to you may not be trivial to me. What is an emergency for one person is like, we'll get to it later for another. But I have found in my own life, most of the arguments and fights I get into, and then as a Christian man, most of the arguments and fights I have seen or experienced within the body of Christ have been over things that are non-salvation issues and that just quite frankly don't matter. But here's the catch. I don't get to decide what matters to somebody else. Because what's not important to me is important to somebody else. And so we have to find a way to communicate with each other, to understand motive, to understand what's going on, to learn to expect the best out of each other and not assume that that person's trying to cause me harm or trying to upset me or trying to make me feel like, ugh! And to respect each other mutually. When you say something that it didn't come out of your mouth the way you intended it to, the other person has a chance to sit back and go, I've known this person X amount of years. I know that's not what they meant, but that's what I heard. And I have an option. I can blow up on it, or I can say, hey, look, wait, what you said kind of bothered me. Is that what you meant, or did you mean something else? And now it gives us a chance to talk it out. And instead of having an explosion, things are at peace. And we'll talk some more on that in a minute. So unmet expectations are poisonous. All of us have expectations, and sometimes we have unmet expectations, and they are poisonous to everyone. It doesn't matter if you're single or married. There are expectations that you have that are poisonous. It doesn't matter whether you have a job or you're unemployed. There are expectations that, when unmet, can become poisonous. Old or rich, old or young, rich or poor, male or female. Unmet expectations become poisonous because they can drop poison into a relationship that over time can kill a relationship, can destroy friendships, can destroy the most intimate of relationships, and keep us isolated and alone. Begin to do what? Lead to false conclusions. They did this, therefore they must not like me. They must hate me. They must think I don't matter. I must be invisible. They must know all my dirty secrets and are holding it against me. And I could go on and on. But unmet expectations can poison us by leading us to making false conclusions in the relationship. It can also be a place for building anger and resentment, hate. Or another way to put it is we give the devil a foothold to destroy relationships. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Jesus came that we may have life and have it to the full. And he showed us how to have that life. To love one another as he has loved me. Well, and to love my neighbor as myself. Well, if I love my neighbor as myself, then that means I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Unless I don't love myself. And that is a problem for some people. But unmet expectations can poison us by creating anger and resentment and hate in our relationships. And it can go farther than that, quite frankly. It can cause me or you to begin to behave in a harmful way. Whether it be physical abuse, verbal abuse, neglect, screaming and hollering, abandonment, ignoring people, drawing false conclusions, judging everybody the same way, whether they've done it or not, holding Paul accountable for something that Tyson did. And Paul didn't do it. By the way, Tyson didn't either, but you get the idea. As we go on, it says, you adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity with God? Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. How we treat each other, how we interact with each other matters. And we can interact with each other the way the world does, which is all of selfishness, quite frankly. Or we can interact with one another the way Christ has called us to love, to care, to see, to embrace, to offer grace, to offer mercy, to offer the benefit of the doubt, to recognize that maybe the person's acting the way they're acting not because they're mad at me, but because there's a thorn in their paw. Like the lion, the old fable? The lion's walking around roaring at everybody, and the bottom line is he had a thorn in his paw. Pull it out, then he'll eat you. Or do you think Scripture says without reason that he jealously longs for the Spirit he has caused to dwell in us? But he gives us more grace. And if God's going to give me grace, then who am I not to give someone else grace when they don't meet my expectations? Especially the expectations that I've not yet shared. And if I have, realize that meeting those expectations takes time. If you've ever worked for a company, you know full well you didn't start off on that job as a new person and become an expert overnight. You know full well if you were in a friendship, you didn't wake up one day in the very beginning and become an expert on friendship and relationships. You just didn't. It takes time. You're going to make mistakes. They're going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. And we have got to learn to be Christ-like and give grace. If he gives me more grace, I'm going to give you more grace. That is why Scripture said, God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. Don't lose that. God opposes the proud. And he shows favor to the humble. That's a choice we make every day, to be proud or to be humble. And that affects every relationship we're in. It doesn't mean be a footstool. If I put my hand in a lion's cage and it bites me, that's on the lion. If I do it a second time, that's on me. But in a relationship, if I want the relationship to work, I've got to be willing to work through that. Because sometimes the wounds are so deep that unless I'm willing to be there day in and day out, there's never going to be healing. But I can tell you in the relationship that I share with my wife, her staying next to me for the last 31 years has brought the best in me out. And there's still a lot more to get. And I feel like I have helped bring some of the best in her out. And that should be true in all of our relationships. When we're willing to be humble. I can be right and not be arrogant. I can be right and not be prideful. I can be wrong and be arrogant. I can be wrong and be prideful. But hey, as we're getting close to the end here, didn't everybody come with a high-tech mind-reading helmet? I mean, when you were born, didn't they put one on your head and say, go get them, boys. Go get them, girls. How many men have ever felt like you needed that helmet? How many women wish their men had that helmet? How many friends wish your friends had that helmet? I mean, why is that, right? Maybe because we're miscommunicating. There's a lot of different reasons. There are people in here. But I'm not a mind reader. But what I can tell you, personal experience, I've been my dad's son for almost 54 years. I can tell in a room when he wants to say something. I can tell when he's angry, and I can tell when he's happy. Even when he says, I'm happy, and I can tell, no, he's not. And that might be because he's dragging me by the arm to the room to spank me. I don't know. But no, you know what I'm talking about. In your closest friends, or your closest fellow coworkers, can you not tell how they're feeling? Maybe not why they're feeling that way, but you can tell when something's off based on the relationship. But that doesn't mean you can read what's going on in their head. You just can tell something's not right. So sometimes the best thing we can do is say, hey, look, based on the relationship, I can tell something's bothering you, or at least something's on your mind right now. I want you to be aware of that. And if you feel like talking about it, I'm here. And if not, I want to respect that. So now what I've done is I've let that person know I can tell something's wrong, but I'm also respecting their right to privacy and their desire and willingness to talk about it. But I'm also got to understand that some people can't. A lot of you, especially those of you over the age of 50, just because of time on earth, not because of your age in particular. You grew up and didn't have a voice. Some of you, not all of you. Maybe you were abandoned. Maybe you had a bully for a parent. Maybe you were one of 15 kids. And you just never felt like anybody ever, what you said mattered. And when you did say it, nobody really paid attention to it. And so you kept stuff to yourself, and you just don't know how to say it. It's not that you don't want to. Chances are, everybody in this room has a song that when you hear it, it speaks to your heart about what you wish you could say. Whether it be a joyful song, a sad song, or a go-get-'em song, it could be that it's saying what your heart feels, but your voice can't speak until you learn. Blank should know how I'm feeling without me having to tell them. Is that a fair statement? No. It's not. If I don't expect blank, let's put Robin and Kim in this one. If I don't expect Kim to know what I'm pouting about, I try to tell why I'm upset. I mean, think about it. This is a chance where we can move into being proactive in the issue. Rather than sitting there with duck lips, find a way to share what you're upset about. Action steps. Talk openly or communicate your needs about what you expect from one another. Because you have expectations. But just because you have them doesn't mean the people around you know what they are. Determine if what your expectations are realistic or unrealistic. Determine if your expectations are realistic or unrealistic. Example, cheesy, but example. For me to expect to get a cup of coffee in the morning, somebody to bring it to me, that normally does it. Like if I bring one to Jennifer every morning, she can learn to expect that, right? What she and I can't expect is for the coffee to jump out of the bag into the coffee pot and the water to pour itself and it to make itself. Even if I have it cured, somebody's got to put it into the cured, the K-cup. Somebody's got to add the water. Somebody's got to push start, and all that's got to happen, right? So determine if your expectations are realistic or unrealistic in your relationships with other people. And then this is where it gets really vulnerable and intimate. Pray together about what your next steps are. If you don't do that, you're leaving God out of it. It's what the world does. But by getting together, talking about it, and praying together, you and I are inviting God into our relationship. And we are inviting God into the solution. And maybe, just maybe, people who are held prisoner by expectations are set free. Because we do and act and behave in the way that our Father in heaven expects us to. Let's stand and sing.